This video is about explaining Kolb cycle and how you implement it. So I'm sure you're all familiar with Kolb cycle and the 4 stages, and this is the how-to guide that diagrammatically explains Kolb cycle to you. The other resource that you can look at is a document called Kolb in Words, and that takes you through the sorts of questions and criteria you should be answering for each stage. So the first thing to talk about is, what is Kolb cycle actually all about and what's it trying to do? And the answer to that is, it's trying to get you to take things that you experience and learn in specific situations and think about how those apply more widely so that you can proactively apply that learning into lots of different situations and maximize the benefit that you get from it. And that comes from this philosophy that there are effectively 3 types of learning. The first one of those is, as an individual experiences a situation and doesn't really learn anything from it. And in Kolb cycle terms, what that looks like is you have a stage 1 experience, you don't really learn anything from it, and you just keep repeating that same experience or mistake. The second type of learning is non-reflective learning, and that's where an individual has an experience and they learn something about it in a specific situation, but they don't really think beyond that. And in Kolb cycle terms, that would mean that you have some form of experience, and out of that you think about it. Perhaps you learn something about it in that specific situation. From there you might make a plan about how you will deal with that next time you encounter it in that specific situation, and you cycle through that loop of experience, learning something specific, maybe working out how not to repeat that specific mistake again in future, but you're skipping stage 3 in terms of trying to apply that learning more widely. And the third type of learning is when an individual has some sort of experience and they reflectively learn from that. In Kolb cycle terms, you have an experience, you think about that experience to learn something specific, you then think about where that learning could apply more widely, and you try and think about some tools or some methods that you could use to improve your performance generally. You then make a plan of action about how you're going to implement those tools and how you're going to behave in future, and then you have another experience that might be similar but a little bit different to that original event, but because you've cycled through Kolb cycle, you have a plan of action for how you're going to deal with that, and as a result your performance improves quite rapidly. So let's break this down into the various stages. And in stage 1, what we're trying to do is describe a situation where the outcome to that particular situation was unexpected or unknown. That could be worse or better than you expected it to be. And what you want to think about is, what did you expect was going to happen before that event started, what actually did happen, and what was your role in that event. Now notice you're not actually analysing the event, you're simply recording it for future analysis. And if we look at that in the Kolb in Words document, again we briefly described the event. You talk about what would you expect was going to happen before you went into the event. It could also be that you didn't know what to expect because you'd never dealt with it before. What was the actual outcome from the event? And again, what were you doing as part of that event? And once that happens, you're moving on to stage 2 where you do your analysis. And as part of that analysis, the first thing you really want to think about is your feelings or your emotional reaction to that experience. And the reason that's important is because the emotional reaction you're having to something in the moment will have an influence on how you're dealing with it, and also the way in which you react to it as you think back on it in hindsight might have an impact on how you choose to deal with it again in future. The next thing you want to look at is what caused that outcome to occur. And the way you're going to go about doing that is to think about what decisions of yours or what actions of yours might have contributed to the outcome, what decisions or actions of other people might have contributed to the outcome. Were there any external factors that might have come into play? How do you think you performed overall, given the situation? And out of that, you want to try and extract one specific thing that you've learnt from this event. And in the Kolben Words document terms, there's a bit more detail here. The type of emotions you want to think about are anger, frustration, embarrassment, stress, maybe happiness, a range of different emotional reactions. And by way of example, it could be that you get into a conflict with somebody at your work, and at the moment you get quite angry and frustrated and you lose your temper. And later on, as you think back on it, perhaps you're feeling a bit embarrassed about having lost your temper and not having handled the situation as well as you might have done. You would then think about, what did you do that might have caused that outcome? What did other people do? In terms of external factors, we're talking about non-human factors that might have come into play. So it could be things like a hardware or software failure, a weather event, a traffic jam. Let's say you were trying to get to site for a particular meeting and there was a traffic jam that was unexpected and that caused a delay. Or perhaps you were doing a presentation and you had a hardware failure and that caused a problem and influenced the outcome. You want to think about how you performed in the circumstances. So given your level of responsibility, your stage of learning, the complexity of the situation, how well do you think you handled it? Could you have done better? Did you do quite well, all things considered? And what you really want to do now is focus on one particular thing that you've learnt. Now, it could be that there are several things that you've learnt. Coming back to the argument scenario, perhaps you've learnt that you need to control your emotions a little bit better. Perhaps you've learnt that you need to manage stress better. Perhaps you've learnt that you need to be better organised. There could be a number of different things that you've learnt out of a particular situation, but for each reflection that you do, you need to focus on one specific thing. It could be that from that event there are a number of different things you've learnt, and in that case you would write separate reflections for each one, focusing in on developing and improving that particular area or learning from that particular area. But for any given reflection, you really need to focus on one particular thing. Okay, so now we've had an experience and we've analysed that experience to try and learn something from it in that specific situation. And the next thing we do is move on to stage 3. And stage 3 is about trying to generalise that learning from a specific situation into a broader context. The way you're going to go about doing that is to provide 2 detailed and fairly specific examples of different situations that are different to each other and different to the original event where that learning might be applied. Okay, so it shouldn't be experiences you've had in the past. They should be new things that you could think of that you might encounter in future where that learning could be applied. And you want to try and think of as wide a ranging scenarios as you can. They should be related to professional engineering practice, but they should be substantially different to each other and to the original event where that learning occurred. The second part of stage 3 is to do a little bit of research into a tool or method to improve performance that suits you personally. And going back to the Kolben Words document, you want to give 2 clear and specific examples where that lesson can apply that are different to each other and different to the original event. And coming to the research part, it doesn't need to be a PhD thesis. It's as simple as talk to somebody who has more experience than you, a colleague or a mentor. It could be read a journal or a textbook to try and find a tool or method to improve your performance in that area. Or you could do some online research, Google it, try and use authoritative, well-respected websites and find a tool or a method that you could use to improve your performance in that area. So we've had an experience, we've learnt something from it, we've thought about how that learning could apply more broadly, and we've found a tool or a method to improve our performance. And the fourth thing that we do is to plan for future behaviour. And you want to think about what can you do to prepare to deal with similar situations in future. How are you going to change your behaviour? What is going to be your plan of action moving forward? And that plan should be based on the method or the tool that you found in your research in stage 3. You want to think about, why do you think that that plan is going to be effective? So is there some evidence that this tool or method that you've selected is an effective tool or method? And the other thing you want to think about is, does it suit you personally? And if we come back to the Kolb in Words document, you want to concisely state how your behaviour or approach is going to change, what is your plan, and base that on the tool or method that you find in your research in stage 3. You want to say why this behaviour or approach is likely to work, so what evidence can you find that it's an effective tool or method, and you want to state, why does that plan suit you personally in terms of the situations that you're working in and in terms of the way you like to work or your personal working style. And as an example of that, it's not much good coming up with a tool that is very prescriptive and oriented in a lot of steps and stages that you need to follow if you're the kind of person who likes to be fairly free-flowing and ad hoc in your working style. Similarly, it might be that you need some organisational help in the way you're tackling things, and a very structured tool or method suits you well. And the other thing is, it's not much good coming up with a tool that doesn't really suit the situations in which you work. And a simple example of that could be organisation or time management, in which you might like to make a list of things you need to do. Now, if you were to keep that list on a chart beside your desk in the office and write down all the things you need to do, or perhaps you were to record it in Microsoft Outlook on your desktop PC, but in fact you tend to spend a lot of time away from your desk or on site, that wouldn't be a very effective tool in terms of the situations in which you work. You would be better off to use a tool or a method that's mobile, for instance, a handwritten site diary, or perhaps a mobile-based app. And that would suit the situations in which you work much more effectively. So that's basically Kolb's cycle in a nutshell. It's pretty straightforward. You have an experience which you record. You then analyse that experience to try and learn something from it in that specific situation. You then try and apply that specific learning into broader situations, so you can proactively apply it as widely as possible, and you do a little bit of research into a tool or method to improve your performance. You then go about making a plan of how you're going to behave in future, and you think about, why is that plan going to be effective and why does it suit you personally?